Brazilian online market in numbers.
Hi everyone, my name's Ed Birkin from H2 Gambling Capital. We're a market data, market intelligence company. We focus on 150 markets globally, and clearly with the regulation in Brazil, we've been a big focus for us this year. So what we're going to talk about very briefly today is analysis of the regulated market, how we're looking to estimate the illegal market, and why customers still use these unlicensed operators when you have the regulated operators now offering. So first of all, let's look pre-regulation. Pre-regulation, we estimate the Brazilian market for sports and iGaming generated about 24 billion reais in GGR. As you can see, around 2020 COVID, that was when there was a significant acceleration in market growth. This isn't something specific to the Brazilian market. We've seen it globally. But obviously, when regulation was announced, there was a lot of operators that joined the market, increased all of their marketing spend substantially as it became more grey and less black. And you've seen significant growth where the market has gone up fourfold in the past 5 years. If you look at it, a lot of people outside of Brazil talk about it in US dollars to try and understand. So it went from 1.3 billion US dollars in 2024 to 4.9. The important thing to understand here is that the market didn't drop in 2020. We're looking at a current FX, and exchange rates can have a big issue. So if you're looking in constant FX, you can see the growth, but then you get the market's at $4 billion. So if people are talking about the size of the market in euros or US dollars, it really depends, what quarter, what year they're talking about, because it's the same in real, but obviously it's very different, 20% different in terms of US dollars, which is why we like to focus on local currency. So January 2025, we moved to the regulated market. So we're going to get regulated data soon, hopefully. I know there's been issues with the system collecting all the data with the regulator. But I've been told, rightly or wrongly, that in the next month or so we should get some data on the market. Just to be clear, especially the January data is not the amount of revenue that we estimate in the legal market that will be disclosed. This is the amount of revenue that we believe was generated by operators who are now licensed. So in January, a lot of those would have still been using their .com sites, and this won't necessarily be shown in the legal market. But we estimate that it's running around 1.4 billion real of GGR, which is about 20% or so down on what we were seeing the same time last year. Now, for the operators who got their .bet, .br site very early in January, we understand that they're down a lot more. Even described to me as a bloodbath by some people. All the KYC checks is really hard to kind of onboard their clients they were using before. So we would expect the official numbers that comes through the actual license sites from the SPA to be lower than this. We do a lot of player surveys and try and understand players, drivers, what they're betting on. Again, we're not sure what's actually going to be disclosed by the SPA, but what players are telling us is that about 55% of the market is iGaming. Now, this is a number that could be a bit low. If we speak to some of the operators, they'll tell us that 80% of their business is from casino. But we also know some of the larger sports-focused operators are getting more than 50% from sport. So that's our best guess at the moment, although it wouldn't surprise me if the iGaming market, if we get official data, is closer to 60-65%, which, from a foreigner was surprising when you look at Brazil, and you'd expect that, given the focus on football and sports and the heritage, it would be a predominantly sports betting market. But almost every single market globally which has sports and iGaming legalized, iGaming is the biggest driver. Sports to capture the customer, cross-sell to iGaming to generate the GGR. In terms of GGR, slots is still the biggest product, despite the popularity of crash games. Crash games are significantly more popular in Brazil than we're seeing in other developed markets. And live casino, which for the past decade has been the buzzword, live casino is growing, you need live casino. Slots is still the number one product in pretty much every single market globally. Now, I think it's important to talk about player segmentation. If people talk about an iGaming player, or we use that in terms of sports betting as well, There is no such thing as an average player. You have people who are spending 10 reais a week, 10 reais a month, and you have ones who are spending over 1,000 a week. You have ones who are spending 10,000 a week. And from our survey data, and we appreciate we don't capture everyone, the top 2% are generating over 20% of revenues. The bottom 25% are generating just 3% of revenues. So who are you going to go after? If you've signed up 25% of players in the market, you're going to be pretty happy with yourself. If you've got 3% of revenues, you're going to be pretty pissed off. In reality, the top 1%, top 2% is more likely to be generating significantly more than our survey data shows. So in the UK, the top 1% of customers generate 25% of the market revenues, and the top 5% generate 60% of the revenues. Netherlands, it's even more, and this is all official data from the regulator. Top 1% generate over 40% of the market. And for NFL betting this season in the US, the top 3% generated 82% of the market. So you really need to look at customer segmentation in terms of who you're attracting, because you want that top 3%. You don't want to be wasting money, regardless of the cost of the CPA, to generate these players who are generating you no revenue in return. There's just no ROI on that. We look at things on a regional basis, and it's no surprise that average weekly spend in the southeast of Brazil is much higher than elsewhere, and a lot of operators look at this when they're looking at where they're doing their marketing spend. Again, you want to be acquiring the higher value customers. And also, it's not just about acquiring a customer. So the higher value customers, unsurprisingly, have more accounts. So let's say you're happy, you've gone out, you've acquired a customer. It turns out they're actually quite a high value customer. That's not the job done. You need to retain them and get their share of wallet. What's it matter if you've got a customer spending 5,000 reais a week, happy days, if they have 5 accounts and you're generating 5% of their spend? So that's the battle. It's not just acquiring them, it's making them want to play with you. And over 72% of high-value customers have 3 or more accounts. You will not be the only operator who has that customer. We also look at what key drivers of choice of operator. So this is what the customers are saying in the survey is their primary driver. Now, there may be more than one driver, but again, low-value players prefer ease of use. They want to go on there, and they just want to make it easy to use that product. If you're looking at the higher-value customers, they care more about the product availability. Do you have all the products available on the site? Do you have all the gaming games available on the site? Do you have all the sports options available on the site? As an example, if you look at the US, FanDuel, market leader, they were the ones who really developed same-game parlay products earlier than anyone else, and they've managed to continue that and take share. So again, what should you focus your spend on? Are you looking at bonus offers, pricing? And that all depends on the type of customer you're trying to get. We do monthly market share estimates. All of these slides can be available afterwards, so you don't need to worry about taking too many pictures of them being too small. We just show the top level ones there. We do it for every single operator in the market. It's unsurprising that the large operators in the grey market prior to regulation are also the largest in the regulated market at the moment. But for me, what's most interesting, and I say this loosely because I do data, but it's tracking all of the smaller operators, the local operators who are newly launched, and which of those can gain traction, and how that market share will change over time. Now, the unlicensed market. So we look at this in 2 ways. We look at it as a visible market, and this is what we see more in Europe, where people use traditional affiliate methods, brands, they want to build their brand and attract you to their website. We can measure that. The invisible market is really hard to track, and this is something that we're seeing is particularly big in Brazil. Operators that aren't even using brands, they're not using traditional affiliate sites, they're using influencers, as was talked about before, app-based marketing, Telegram, links through, using all of that for customer acquisition. Very hard to track that. PIX data that we haven't had access to, but speaking to some financial institutions, suggests the illegal market, the invisible one, is at least as large as the size of what we estimate the visible market. On top of that, you have the very, very high-value players who aren't even using PIX, who are going through Junket's system, and they're outside of the payment system. So we're continuing to work with all the industry participants to get the total size of the market. you're probably hoping for an exact number today. We don't have it, but we're hoping in the next couple of months to have a number that the industry accepts as a starting point, and it's only then we will truly understand the size of the Brazilian iGaming market. Reasons for using the unlicensed operators. Again, it goes by value player, and we do know that the higher value players have said they use the unlicensed market more than medium to low value players. Better odds, better pricing, that's one of them. Fewer customer checks, this is all about the KYC. Some just want to go on there and get their data straight away. People like to bet on credit. One thing we haven't put on there is crypto. So when we do our next survey in next month, we'll be looking at why, if people want to bet on crypto, which you're not legally able to do in Brazil, if that's driving them to there. So there are many different reasons that people are still using unlicensed operators. So I'll run through this one very quickly because, as I say, you can get it. But for the visible market, we use data. We use a program that tracks over 3 million iGaming keywords and 33,000 affiliates. And this has given us a list of 1,700 unlicensed sites targeting the Brazilian market. And we track monthly web traffic on each of these, looking at the bounce rate and also the amount of time spent on the sites and compare that licensed to unlicensed sites. But we also use proprietary player survey data and unprompted brand awareness to try and estimate the visible illegal market GGR. So we identify the licensed operators, capture their traffic, affiliate traffic and brand awareness, do the same with the illegal market, and that gives us a activity channelization, we call it. So this suggests that 90% of activity, visits to websites, is with onshore operators. However, we also know, and this is saying there's 19 million visits to unlicensed visible sites that there were in February. Annoyingly, March data won't be out for a couple of days. And that actually links well with our share of unprompted brand awareness and affiliate traffic, which all suggest about 90% of the traffic is through onshore operators. But through our survey data and data in other countries, we know that people who use offshore sites spend more. So that is not the same as onshore versus offshore GGR. So when we change a spend coefficient, that suggests that the visible illegal market is about 28% of the market that we're seeing compared to the licensed one. And that's the important figure of the revenue channelization. However, how big is the unlicensed market? So if we were to suggest the invisible unlicensed market were the same size as the licensed market, then that would put it at almost 50% illegal. In reality, we think that number is probably going to be higher. We don't have the data points yet to do it. We don't want to just put something out that's finger in the air. I know there's a number around that people are talking about 60% being offshore. We've spoken to some suppliers who are saying about 40% of their revenues are from illegal operators or unlicensed. So I think the number is going to end up somewhere between 40 to 60%, but we need to get that number so the industry understands the starting points of where they are. So if you look at that, then actually we have seen significant market growth. So although the numbers that will come out of the licensed operators is going to suggest it's been a bit of a bloodbath and that revenues have dropped significantly since regulation, we think that actually the market is considerably bigger than it was a year ago. This is just looking at the unprompted brand awareness. So again, we look at it in terms of all the operators, including licensed and unlicensed. We have about 3,500 responses where we just ask them to name 3 to 5 betting operators or gaming operators, and we collate all of that data. As I said, that works in other markets. In Brazil, that doesn't help with the invisible ones where quite often people are betting on sites or playing gaming games on sites where they don't even know the brand. It's just a link through and they just play the product. So finally, future market forecasts. Everyone wants to know what's going to happen in the future. Again, these numbers don't now include the invisible part yet until we know more about it. But we forecast continued strong growth. So by 2029, and putting these numbers out is always dangerous because a lot changes in 5 years, and I can pretty much guarantee that if someone has this in 5 years' time, the number will be completely different and I will look stupid. But our best estimate is that it should get to about 50 billion reais by 2029. We do estimate in US dollars about 8 billion. Now, these numbers are not correct because we know that the invisible market isn't included in this, and therefore it is going to be a much higher share. With this new legislation that's also banning people who are on welfare from betting, that is also going to have a significantly larger part of the unlicensed market. So while I kept this slide in, there is no way that channelization, in my view, in Brazil in 5 years' time will get to 90%. But we can see how big the legal market can grow over that time. That's everything. Obrigado por me ouvir. And if you would like access to the presentation, please either give me a shout before I leave or feel free to drop me an email on there. And thank you all for listening. I hope that you at least took away a couple of interesting points.